Jasmine Crockett stepped onto the debate stage with determination in her eyes, her deep purple suit jacket gleaming beneath the bright studio lights. At 37, the Congresswoman faced her challenger head-on, radiating quiet confidence. Moments earlier, Patel had approached the microphone, pointing directly at her as he declared, "Congresswoman Crockett is twisting the law to fit her own agenda, and the American people deserve better." The accusation rippled to the crowd, drawing gasps and murmurs. Crockett, gripping her notes firmly, kept her focus steady. She refused to back down as millions watched from home. Across the stage, Patel, armed with a Harvard law degree and years as a conservative commentator, looked certain he would dominate the first-term congresswoman from Texas. But Crockett, a former criminal defense attorney and an unshakable believer in justice, saw this as her moment to prove him wrong. She stepped toward the microphone with poise, ready to turn the debate into a masterclass on constitutional law. Before we dive deeper into this heated exchange, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more political analysis and in-depth discussions. The debate hall buzzed with anticipation as Patel stood confidently at his podium, his navy suit immaculate, his expression smug and assured. The moderator introduced him as a respected legal analyst and political commentator, prompting polite applause from the conservative side of the room. Patel wasted no time. "The problem with politicians like Congresswoman Crockett," he began in a measured, self-assured tone, "is that they bend and manipulate the law to suit whatever narrative they're pushing that day. Take her recent claims about voting rights legislation. She's distorted legal precedent, constitutional interpretation, and judicial history, all to advance a partisan agenda." The crowd stirred. Conservatives nodded approvingly. Progressives shifted uneasily in their seats. Patel's voice grew more forceful. "Congresswoman Crockett insists that recent state election laws are unconstitutional, when any first-year law student would recognize that they fall well within established precedent. She either misunderstands constitutional law, or worse, deliberately misleads the American people." Turning toward Crockett, he added sharply, "She may have a law degree, but her interpretation would collapse in any serious legal forum. I've analyzed every major voting rights case in the past 50 years, and her argument simply cannot stand under current jurisprudence." Leaning closer to the microphone, he lowered his voice dramatically. "This isn't just an academic debate. It's about the integrity of our legal system. When elected officials like Ms. Crockett manipulate legal principles for political gain, they erode public trust in our institutions and in the rule of law itself." As cameras zoomed in, Crockett scribbled notes quickly, occasionally shaking her head. Her expression was calm, composed, not rattled. This was no ordinary political duel. It was a battle over who truly held the authority to interpret and defend the Constitution before the nation. For months, Patel had dominated conservative media, branding himself as the voice of legal reason against what he called progressive judicial activism. His Ivy League credentials and commanding presence had made him a favorite among viewers eager to challenge Democratic lawmakers. Crockett's path had been different and far tougher. From public defender to state legislator to congresswoman, she had built her career representing ordinary Americans. She had tried more than 100 cases, defending clients who could never afford the elite attorneys Patel once worked alongside in corporate law. When Patel finally concluded his tirade, the moderator turned to Crockett. "Congresswoman, you have 2 minutes to respond." Crockett rose slowly, straightening her notes before stepping to the microphone. Her calm presence contrasted sharply with Patel's polished showmanship. She spoke not like a performer, but like someone who had argued real cases before real judges. Mr. Patel seems to have spent more time preparing personal attacks than studying actual case law. She began evenly. "While he lectures about what any first-year law student should know, I've stood in court defending Americans whose voting rights were violated by the very laws he now defends." A ripple moved through the audience. Crockett continued, steady and resolute. "Let's be specific. The Texas Senate Bill 7 voting restrictions that Mr. Patel claims are supported by precedent were deliberately designed to limit voting methods most used by communities of color. That's not my opinion. It's documented in the legislative record." Patel tried to interject. "That's simply not true." But the moderator cut him off. "Mr. Patel, The Congresswoman has the floor. Crockett opened a folder on her lectern. When Mr. Patel speaks of established precedent, she said, he conveniently overlooks Thornburg versus Jingles, where the Supreme Court affirmed that voting laws producing discriminatory effects can still violate the law, even without explicit discriminatory intent. She held up a document. Page 47, Mr. Patel, the section you must have missed during your Harvard education. Laughter and surprise rippled through the room. Patel shifted, his confident smile beginning to falter. Crockett pressed on. And perhaps most telling of all, Mr. Patel cites 50 years of precedent while ignoring Shelby County versus Holder, the case that dismantled key protections of the Voting Rights Act less than a decade ago. For justices dissented, warning that the decision would lead to precisely the kind of voter restrictions we're seeing today. The hall grew tense. Supporters on both sides leaned forward. Conservatives uneasy, progressives energized. The moderator stepped in. To provide some context, Mr. Patel, in your recent Federalist article, you compared these voting laws to those in other democratic nations. Could you elaborate? Patel, eager to shift the topic, nodded quickly. Certainly. What the Congresswoman fails to mention is that many European democracies, Germany, France, Sweden, enforce far stricter voting regulations. They require government-issued ID, prohibit ballot collection, and limit early voting. Are we accusing them of voter suppression? Of course not. They're protecting electoral integrity, just as these state laws do. Crockett smiled faintly as she jotted notes. Patel continued, his tone rising. The Congresswoman's selective citations ignore broader judicial doctrine. The Anderson-Burdick test, established by the Supreme Court, allows states to impose reasonable, non-discriminatory regulations to ensure fair elections. And these laws meet that standard easily. This debate isn't about voting rights. It's about political control. Congresswoman Crockett and her allies want to federalize elections for partisan advantage, not because voters are being denied access. The moderator turned to Crockett one final time. Congresswoman, your response? Crockett stood, arranging her documents neatly. Mr. Patel's international comparison, she said calmly, is intriguing and completely irrelevant. The United States Constitution and our long, painful history of voter suppression create a legal framework unlike that of any other nation. Her voice was steady, her gaze locked on Patel, ready to continue the fight, not just for political points, but for principle. Since Mr. Patel wishes to discuss Europe, Crockett began, lifting a printed report from her lectern. Let's review a few details he conveniently left out. She flipped open the document. Germany, which he mentioned, automatically registers every citizen upon turning 18. National identification is free and universally available. Elections are held on Sundays to maximize voter participation. Early voting is open to anyone who requests it, and polling stations are required by law to be within walking distance for most citizens. A low murmur rippled through the audience as Crockett smoothly turned his argument on its head. Now, Sweden, another example Mr. Patel cited, automatically mails voting cards to every eligible citizen. They offer 3 full weeks of early voting and multiple forms of acceptable identification. They've invested millions to ensure equitable access for all voters. She placed the report down firmly. So if Mr. Patel wants to model the European system, I'm entirely supportive, provided we also adopt their comprehensive measures guaranteeing universal voter access. The audience reacted audibly. Patel realized his argument had been neatly inverted, tried to interject, but the moderator raised a hand, signaling him to wait. Crockett pressed on, her tone measured but unrelenting. As for the Anderson-Burdick test, Mr. Patel either misunderstands it or deliberately misrepresents it. The test requires courts to weigh the burden imposed on voters against the state's justification for that burden. When voting restrictions disproportionately harm minority voters without substantial evidence of fraud, they fail that test, plain and simple. Lifting another document, she continued, her voice gaining quiet strength. This brings us to Mr. Patel's most revealing claim, that no one is actually being prevented from voting. That statement reflects a profound disconnect from the lived experiences of millions of Americans. Patel raised his hand, and when recognized, countered briskly. The Congresswoman is appealing to emotion, not law. The Constitution clearly grants states the authority to regulate elections. The restrictions she objects to have been upheld time and again. Crockett shook her head, jotting notes as he spoke. Patel pressed on, regaining some of his earlier composure. The Congresswoman makes sweeping claims about discrimination, but where's the evidence? Where are the people actually being denied the right to vote? These are hypothetical harms used to justify federal overreach. The remark drew an audible reaction from the crowd, and the moderator had to call for quiet. When the room settled, Crockett leaned forward. "Let's address that," she said evenly. Mr. Patel demands proof of real people affected by these laws, as though constitutional violations are theoretical until they happen to him. Her eyes fixed on him, unblinking. Would you call a Fourth Amendment violation theoretical if the police entered your home without a warrant? Would a First Amendment violation be theoretical if the government silenced your writing? The room fell utterly silent. Constitutional rights are not theoretical, Mr. Patel. They are the foundation of our democracy, and their violation harms real Americans. She turned to the audience. But since Mr. Patel insists on examples, let's discuss them. Opening a folder, she began to read. Maria Gonzalez of Arizona, a naturalized citizen, was removed from voter rolls because her name matched that of a non-citizen in another state. This process, called interstate cross-checking, disproportionately flags Hispanic and Asian voters. Despite proving her citizenship, she wasn't reinstated in time to vote. Patel tried to interrupt, but Crockett lifted a hand. One story not enough? Fine. Consider James Williams of Georgia, a 70-year-old veteran who had voted in the same precinct for 30 years. His polling place was closed without notice, and the nearest alternative was 15 miles away. Mr. Williams doesn't drive, and public transit doesn't reach that area. She flipped another page. Or Robert Lee of North Carolina, whose ID was rejected because his card read Robert Lee instead of Robert T. Lee, despite decades of voting without issue. The camera cut to Patel, who stood stiffly at his podium, his jaw tight. Crockett, by contrast, remained calm, her papers organized, her tone unwavering. Patel tried to recover. "The truth," he declared, raising his voice, "is that Congresswoman Crockett and her allies are twisting legal principles to federalize elections for partisan gain. That's the reality any honest scholar would admit." The moderator turned to Crockett. "Congresswoman, you have 1 minute for rebuttal." Crockett stood once more, holding a thick stack of documents. Mr. Patel asked for evidence of real voters harmed by these laws. "I anticipated that, so I brought it." She lifted the stack for the cameras to see. These are sworn statements from 27 elderly black voters in rural Georgia who couldn't vote after their polling places were closed. And this, she held up another document, is the testimony of a disabled veteran in Arizona who waited 7 hours to cast his ballot after polling locations in his Latino neighborhood were reduced by 70%. The hall went silent. And since Mr. Patel mentioned reputable legal scholars, she continued, pulling another volume from her files. Here's an analysis from the Georgetown Law Review, hardly a partisan source, documenting that these new restrictions burden minority voters at rates as high as 6-1 compared to white voters. Patel's expression tightened. He hadn't expected such concrete evidence. Crockett's voice rose with contained conviction. Mr. Patel would have this audience believe that the North Carolina decision was an isolated case. Yet the Fourth Circuit found that legislators requested racial data on voting patterns, then drafted laws to target black voters, and I quote, with surgical precision. She set the opinion on the podium. "That's not my interpretation, Mr. Patel. That's the United States Court of Appeals." The audience erupted. Applause from some, outrage from others. The moderator struggled to restore order as Patel's composure visibly faltered. What began as a theoretical debate had now become something more, a clash between polished rhetoric and lived reality, between abstraction and the people behind the laws. Crockett had turned the debate not just into a legal argument, but into a moral reckoning.